Okay. It's on the hour, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Hello. Thanks everyone for coming. And hello to the people that are gonna be watching this after the fact. Uh, this is like a little class lecture thing that's gonna go over what you can do to improve your DPS, what each class brings to a raid composition, and at the end I'm gonna go over when you're building a team or you're going to be on a team, some sets that are used on supports or even on DPS, and when you would use them, how you would use them, and what they bring to your team. So the first part of this lecture is dedicated to DPSing and how to do that effectively. So on this first slide, we're going to cover the basics of a DPS's stats. When you're parsing or you're doing something in content, you're going to want to use combat metrics. It's an add-on that allows you to see your stats during the most recent fight and allows you to take that information to adjust for the future. Oh, and by the way, if anybody has any questions or if I'm going too fast, go ahead and speak up and then I'll slow down or answer your question. So to start, and you'll see these stats on CMX, there are 4 main stats that you need to worry about, and here is what they are and what they do. So you have your spell or weapon damage, which affects how much damage your abilities and your light attacks do. As a baseline. Then you have your weapon and spell crit, which is how often you crit on your abilities. So this has a maximum value of 100%. That would be constantly critting. That's very hard to hit, probably impossible. Then you have your weapon and spell critical damage, which affects how much of an increase your critical hits are over your base damage. So let's say you have a critical damage value of 105%. That means your critical hits are going to do 105% more than your normal attack would do. And finally, we have offensive penetration, which this used to be spell pen and weapon pen, but now it's just pretty much offensive penetration across the board for the most part. And this is how much your abilities pierce the armor of the target, and it has a specific value that we will get to on this next slide. Any questions about these first 4 stats that we see here? Nope. Okay. So, this is a lot of information on one slide, but it is just listing a couple of the ways that these stats can change. The basic way to understand this is it starts baseline at your max mag and your max stam, whichever is higher, and changes after that. This can be through armor sets. You'll have different bonuses from your armor sets that will boost certain amounts of these 4 stats. But I've listed a couple of ways here, like jewelry enchants can affect your weapon spell damage. It's the increased physical harm and increased magical harm enchants, which as a DPS is what you're going to want to be running. Your CP slottables can be affecting all of these. Armor choice is something that affects it a lot, with medium armor increasing your weapon and spell damage and your critical damage, whereas light armor affects how often you crit and increases your offensive penetration. Here at the bottom, you'll see under offensive penetration, most enemies have an armor value of 1820. So, as I said before, it has a specific value that we're trying to hit. There's also a maximum value that they added a couple patches ago for spell and weapon critical damage, which is 125%. It used to be no cap, and they decided that that was not healthy for the game, so they gave it a cap of 125%. And that kind of changed how we build our tunes. Before, like, you would be able to go Thief or Shadow for your Mundus. This is just one example. You could go Thief or Shadow for your Mundus, but now because of this change, you're better off going Thief. That's because Shadow increases your critical damage, whereas Thief increases critical chance, which you're usually lower on anyway. So this slide is just basically going over what changes these stats and how we can adjust them based on looking at our initial parse. Any questions on here so far? Okay. So this is the slide that we talked with Gerald about before. This past couple updates have focused a lot on hybridization, is what they call it. And hybridization for them is essentially making it so you can use whatever skill, whatever weapon you want, and still be effective in combat. So basically, there is no more, say, like stam DK, mag DK. The line between those two is much slimmer. And this is because this is the big change that they made. Your weapon and spell damage and your crit stats, both your critical damage and critical chance, are now based off the highest of your mag or stam. Before, it was split between the two, and now it affects both of them based on the highest. So your weapon and spell damage are equally affected by your, say, max stam. And on top of this, before mag abilities that cost magicka, basically, they used to only scale off your spell damage, spell critical, and spell critical damage. Now they're based on whatever is higher between weapon and spell for all three of those stats that I just named. So what does this all mean for making your builds? Essentially, it means if you're, say, a mag DPS, say you're a mag DK, or a Knightblade, if you can sustain a stamina costing ability, then you will not lose very much combat effectiveness if you were to, say, replace a magicka costing ability on your rotation. So let's say you're a mag DK and you're having trouble sustaining your magicka because you're running too many magicka costing abilities. You could throw something like Caltrops, which is a stamina costing ability, and that is going to go off of your highest of the two stats, either weapon or spell, for all three of the stats that I just listed. So you can effectively run as many of your off costing abilities or off resource abilities as you can sustain, and you will still be able to do effective damage.
Now, as a mag user, throwing in stamina abilities, I know for me in my rotation, it's like once I'm in real combat, if I'm going to dodge, roll, or block, or basically do any of the normal stam things that I would use my stam for, then when I go to use those stam things that are supposed to be in my rotation now, oftentimes I'm finding I can't, right?
As a stam DPS, I feel like magicka abilities are a lot easier to sustain.
Yeah, it takes a lot of balance when it comes to finding a sustain that works, and it gets even more complicated when you're, say, running something like Basai or you're running Coral Riptide, which require you to have low stam or mag to be effective with those armor sets. And that can be affected through what food you're using, your CP. You can run rejuvenation and sustained by suffering. If you need to have help stam sustaining because you're dodge rolling everywhere, you can run something like slippery or uh, whatever the other one is. What is it? One of them is for roll dodging and one of them is for breaking free.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could run those and that can help you with your SAM sustain. It just takes a lot of experimenting. Like, I've done so many parses where I realize, oh, I have too low stam, I'm not going to be able to do this in content, so I put some more points to sustained by suffering, or I use different potions. Like, I use ulti pots instead of weapon and spell power pots, or something along those lines. And it's not something that's as easy as, like, to generalize for everyone, because everybody's build is different. But it just takes a lot of finagling, I guess.
Hey, Cat, real quick question.
Yeah.
Did you say that Riptide is harder to sustain for Stam now?
It's not hardest to sustain, but it is a little more nuanced in figuring out your sustain, because you want to have enough sustains to where you're at a level of stam that's comfortable. Like, you don't want to be at like 5% stam the entire time, barely scraping by, because then how are you going to have any stam to roll dodge or do any blocking or bashing or stuff like that?
Yeah.
But as compared to something like Reliquin, where you can have as much stam as you want, so it is more nuanced, I guess. I wouldn't say it's harder.
I've actually been, I swapped out all my Rally for Riptide, the non-perfected stuff, and I've, like Half Bear said, I totally agree that Mag is way easier to sustain, at least in my experience, than Stam is, and I've found it even more challenging recently with Riptide that I'm using a lot more pots to recharge my stamina just to be able to make it through a fight.
Yeah.
Okay.
I know for me, back in the day, it was make your character produce as much mag as possible and then figure out a way how to spend that. And if you don't spend all of it, it doesn't hurt, but you just, you know, you spend as much as you can and that becomes your DPS. But now it's like, okay, well, I parse it, 80k, which means I only actually use this much magicka, which means I have to finagle with through food, through pots, through, different where my sources of magicka actually come from to make sure I have just enough magicka, but not too much.
Mm-hmm.
So someone who might be parsing, you know, at 60k or 70k or 80k, each one of the, even if it's the exact same build, in theory, the person who's parsing a little bit less might just need less stamp or less magicka because that's just where they are right now too, which is kind of like a weird thing in my head, but I mean, it is what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. It takes this hybridization especially.
Well,
has made it
for me,
interesting.
like, I tried doing a dual wield like Stam DK that used Whip, right? And I could not sustain it with Lava Foot.
Yeah.
So I had to switch I switched to, I think, Candied Jester coins.
Yeah.
And then I was able to sustain it.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah. It's a lot of balance, I guess, is the main takeaway from hybridization and your sustain. And so we're gonna move.
I generally haven't had any problems running a two-hander back bar as a mag.
Yeah.
With the Maelstrom charge, whatever.
I've found that you can usually run at least 2 abilities of an off resource.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And even I run a Stam Crow where I stack into Stam, and I use Mag Blast Bones, and I use Boneyard and Rune, and I'm still able to sustain. And that's because I have things like Mystic Siphon, because I'm in EC, and a couple other things, but it is a very like difficult to try and find the balance and how many skills am I actually able to run of my off resource before I'm kind of just spamming the button hoping for my resource to recover.
And here's the example of going too far. So on Fiverr, I had Stampede and Carve on the back bar. I switched my Lightning form to Hurricane for stamina.
Mm-hmm.
And then on front bar, I also have Barb Trap. It's too many.
That's too many.
It's too many. It's, yeah. Literally one dodge roll, and now I can't do my rotation.
Yeah, you'd have to run something like Crunchy Spider Skewers.
See, what I think on stamina, it's a lot easier to have Magicka skills, because if you run out of Magicka, then it's like, oh no, I can't cast my spells, but I can still heal myself and dodge roll and break free and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But if you're on Magicka and you run out of stamina, you're kind of screwed if you have to do that.
Yeah.
Now something you could have blocked through killed it.
Mm-hmm. That's just something that makes it a little harder for mag DPS, I guess. So we're gonna go ahead and move on now. That was the very Cliff Notes version of changes. And the next slide, I believe, is armor sets. These are sets that are performing the best in the current state of the game. There are definitely more sets than the one that I listed here that are more specific, like say like Drozakar for Stamden, or War Machine for some Magtunes, stuff like that. But these are the sets that I have found perform best, and I've split them up between Slayer sets and non-Slayer sets. The Slayer sets have a buff that usually comes from trials. They have a buff in their list of things that they give you per piece called Minor Slayer. Minor Slayer increases your damage done against trial and dungeon enemies by 5%. Pretty much in most cases, I'm going to say in most cases because there's some cases where you don't need one, you're going to always want one of your sets to be a Slayer set. Just because a 5% increase in your damage against the enemies that you're fighting is a pretty solid increase. It's about as much as you would get from, say, Powerful Assault or something along those lines. So Coral Riptide is good for Stam. You can even run it on Mag if you want, but it's kind of so. Whirl of the Depths is good on certain fights. It's specifically Basai. I've heard it's very, very good.
I used it on my Ice Warden. It was pretty fun.
Yeah. There's Basai's Mania from a couple patches ago. It's still pretty solid.
I hate that set.
Yeah,
I joined the club. I fucking hate it too.
That one's definitely a tricky one.
Yeah, I had it for a while to get rid of it.
Yeah, there's a lot of specifics that you need to. It's just like we were talking about last slide with sustain and it being very nuanced when you have to have your stats so low that you're getting the benefit from your set, but also not be running out of your abilities or your resource, so you can't cast abilities. Yondir from KA. This one is more it was really good last patch, believe it or not, but it's kind of fallen off to the side now that Coral is out. It's really good on EC crows, I know that. Crows that use Elemental Catalyst. And it's like roughly comparable to Coral on those tunes. There's Perfected Reliquin, which is really good for single target fights, less good for fights with a lot of AoE. And I put False Gods on here. It doesn't perform as well as any of these other ones, but it's very comfortable. I use it a lot for arenas. It's just put it on and forget about it.
And if your Stam Vicious Ophidian is the stand version of that for
Yeah.
like arenas and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Great set.
Just a very solid solid set it and forget it sets. Then for non-Slayer sets, these are usually from dungeons. Some of them are from trials. Zogvin and Medusa and Order's Wrath. I put these three together because they do the same thing, basically. I put them in order of how good they are compared to each other. I would say Zogvin is the best out of all three because it has better 2-piece and 4-piece bonuses. Medusa is still pretty good. I would definitely not say it's bad or anything. And then Order's Wrath is essentially the same thing as Medusa, but 2% less crit chance or crit damage. And these are sets that I would use in situations where I can't use something like Barb Trap. Barb Trap provides 10% bonus to your critical damage, which is something that you need to hit your crit cap most of the time. And Zogvin, Medusa, and Order's Wrath all give you roughly that same amount of critical damage. So in fights where you're not able to put down trap all the time, say you're running around all the time, or you can't reliably place down a trap, I use Zogvin, Medusa, or Order's Wrath. So that's good for something like...
Zogvin's is good if you're ranged, just all
Yeah.
ranged too, and you're not wanting to be in melee range to use a trap.
Yeah, exactly. And so I use these in VCR portals, VSS portals, anywhere that placing a trap down is kind of not easy. I would use Zogvin or any of these other ones. Pillar of Nirn. This one is just it's a solid proc set. Proc set meaning it procs off of doing something. I don't have a ton of experience with Pillar of Nirn, but I know it hits like a truck. And you can even backbar it if you wanted to. I've seen people doing that. Advancing Yakita and Kinras, I put these two together because they are roughly comparable to each other in damage, and they both require hitting light attacks. You need to keep hitting light attacks on your front bar, assuming you have an arena set on your back bar, to keep these to keep these armor set bonuses going. And they I believe, I don't remember the exact buff that Kinras gives. I think it's
Let me go check real quick.
major or minor.
Kinras gives you major Berserk when you have
Berserk.
5 stacks, and minor Berserk when you have 5 stacks.
Yeah, Berserk. And then Advancing Yakita has its own unique buff. And I would say Advancing Yakita and Kinras are probably number 1 and number 2 of doing damage. Kinras is probably the highest damage non-major Slayer set. And then I have Deadly, which is really good on Templars. Any Templar DPS is really good with Deadly. And Azure Blight. The tricky thing about Azure Blight is I believe only one person in the group can run it at a time to get the maximum bonus. And it's a very solid AoE set. It's used a lot in fights that have a lot of AoE encounters. Think in the new trial VDSR Reef Guardians, Azure Blight is really, really good. There's a couple other fights, VSS Navi, where there's the ad phases in between. Azure Blight is really, really good. It pretty much always top parses whoever's in Azure Blight. And those are all the sets that you can have on your front bar, and assuming you have an arena set on your back bar. I don't have arena sets listed here, but you can look at other parses, which I believe is the next slide. Yes, this is different places that you can look for skills and rotations. It's kind of hard to generalize for everybody what their skill and their rotation should be. So essentially what I've left here is some resources that I use when I'm figuring out what skills I want to be running, how my rotation works, stuff like that, to maximize your DPS. Skinny Cheeks website. Skinny Cheeks is a content creator on YouTube. He parses very, very high on almost anything, and he gives the most in-depth guides for endgame DPS. I pretty much use him as a baseline for all of my builds, and it's a point that he makes that it is something to build off of. So you can go to his website, look up, okay, what is a Magicka Necromancer stack, or a Necromancer that's stacking into Magicka, what are they running now in endgame content? And then you can take that and adjust it how you see fit. Say you want less dots, you want a spammable instead of all dots, or stuff like that. And then I have ESO logs on here. This is probably a different lecture that I'm going to do as well, is how to read logs and how to search up different things from logs, either on looking up leaderboards to find DPS of your class to see what they're running in that specific content, or look at your own logs to see how you can improve from that. But yeah, here you can see that I have listed that you can look at the leaderboards to see what other people are running. And the last one I have is look at what other people are doing. Usually that's how you can maximize your DPS, by looking at, oh, this person in another Discord server parses 126k with a Magsork. What are they running? Or something along those lines. I wish I could put more information here about how to make your perfect setup, but that's going to be a lot of subjectivity on your part, where you need to build off of one of these, I would say.
The other thing I'll throw in with using the ESO logs website, so you can look up your class, your your mag or stamina, but then you can also, instead of just sorting it by first dummy, you can actually go in and search by specific boss fights. Even like you can go, well, who's doing best on Navi with a mag sword, or who's doing best on the Sai with a stand-in, whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly.
I really like digging in like that.
Mm-hmm. And it's fun to see. I love going on ESO logs because sometimes you see people in the weirdest setups that are just used to min-max that one specific boss. But most of the time it's pretty much solid sets on what you should be running and what skills they're running are what you should be running, stuff like that. So this is once you found a build that works for you. There is ways to optimize your build once you do that. Many rotations that you're gonna have, you're gonna want to keep up all your dots at the same time. It's just something that will help boost your damage up. You don't want pretty much any of your dots to tick off for more than a couple seconds. And that takes a lot of practice to know, okay, oh god, Rune has a 2-second arm time, so I need to cast it when it has 2 seconds left. And then, oh god, 5 abilities are running out at the same time. Which ones do I prioritize more? That comes from looking at your logs, or looking at your CMX on a certain, say like you look at a parse, and seeing, oh, this one's been doing a lot more damage than these other ones. I should prioritize that more to squeeze out the most DPS for my build. And the second thing is working on your weaving average. Now, we are in a very strange time in the game when it comes to weaving. The new patch that's coming out could change a lot of things, but as of now, light attack weaving is the weaving that you're going to want to do. It's most of you have probably heard the old saying of light attack ability, light attack ability, light attack ability. That's basically the formula you want to go with. But here you'll see that we'll see how the meta shifts for weaving. Who knows? Maybe next patch we'll all be heavy attacking with a resto staff. But that is how you squeeze the most out of your build, I guess. And we'll go over more of this once we look at an actual parse. And I'll explain what I look at.
I would say difference between Stam and Mag too. I think it's harder to keep up dots on Mag because wall lasts 10 seconds, I think. And like your Stam backbar big AoE dots last like 15 seconds. Your hail or your stampede. So you don't have to refresh it as often.
Mm-hmm. And that can like change if you want to have, if you like have a spammable. I would say that having longer dots are better, so you can cast the spammable more. And it basically is very it's very specific to what your build is, how easy it is to keep up your dots and improve your weaving.
Then you could play Mag DK where all of your dots run out at different times and you have like 9 of them.
Yes. I love Mag DK. This one we're actually going to come back to in terms of what potions and pots you're going to be running. And we get to move on to class specifics. Our first one we're going to talk about is Dragon Knight. I believe these slides do not go in order because I think the next one is Warden. But this is basically going to explain what each class brings, what their unique buffs are for the group, what you can do with them, essentially. And this is not to say that, oh, I'm a Mag DK, I need to run Stagger, Engulfing, Igneous, and make sure my Minor Brutality uptimes are perfect. These are just things that the DKs in your group should probably be responsible for in an organized group. I should specify that this is for organized and hyper optimized groups, I suppose. So to start, DKs make very good tanks and very good DPS. Less good healers, as it lists here. They're class Hot, which I believe is a morph of Eruption, is very, very small, like in terms of AoE on the ground. So it's very, very difficult to heal with that. And it doesn't have a burst heal, meaning that it's a very, very challenging healer. So usually we end up having DKs either as a tank or as a DPS. In terms of their actual utility in a raid, you have Igneous Weapons, which gives you Major Sorcery and Brutality, which is an increase. It gives you both, I should specify, and that gives you 20% increase to your weapon and spell damage. And that is a very sizable increase when you're casting a lot of abilities, and they all will increase from this amount of weapon and spell damage. Engulfing Flames is 6% flame damage taken. A lot of DPS are going to use flame damage. It's the highest damage of the 3, being flame, lightning, and ice. So an increase of 6% is pretty sizable. Stone Giant, or as we like to call it, Poop Rocks, gives the enemy Stagger, and this can stack up to 3 times, each stack giving 65 damage taken from all abilities, like all attacks. So at 3 stacks it's 195, which is pretty sizable when you're doing lots of dot damage, lots of damage ticks, and things of that nature. And every class has a unique minor buff you'll see starting now. The DK's minor buff is minor brutality, which increases weapon damage by 10%. And as I said, you'll see that all of the classes have their own unique minor buff. Actually, that's a lie. Necros do not have one, but all of them except Necro.
Yeah, Necro gets the major buff instead.
Yeah, it gives major vuln, which we will get to soon. Wardens are solid in pretty much everything. However, in organized groups, they're almost always going to be a support. And this is because a lot of their buffs are focused on resistance and healing, and that's much more difficult to keep up on the group when you're DPSing at the same time. As it says here, this class has lots of defensive utility, and are more suited to support. Enchanted Growth. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Oh god, how do I go back? Okay. Enchanted Growth gives you minor intellect and endurance, which gives you mag and stam recovery, which will help with sustain. If I'm correct, those are on the dummy, maybe? I'd have to double check. I believe those are on the dummy, and if not, that shows that usually on your dummy, your sustain is worse than it's going to be in actual raid, because in an actual raid, you have way more synergies that you can use to regain your resources through the like Undaunted passive. So that's just a side note. Your sustain in raid is going to be better than your sustain on a dummy, and that's something to keep in mind. They have Swarm, which is minor vuln, 5% damage taken. This is a single target ability. You'll see later that one of the other classes has a AoE version of this, which makes it better for using in things like trash mobs. Expansive Frost Cloak, which is major resolve, lots more resistant, which is really nice when you're doing harder content. And minor toughness, which is 10% health increase. And the reason why we want wardens on supports is because their minor toughness buff is given by healing. You need to heal somebody in your group to give them the minor toughness, which is usually why you have warden healers. Usually at least one warden healer, or rarely you'll have a warden tank that will cast Enchanted Growth, or mushrooms, as warden healers like to call them.
Doesn't Blood Fountain do that too?
I was gonna say I put the Healy Orb on my tank, on my Warden.
And if you're a Warden DPS, if you cast I think you get a heal from your like animal companion abilities when they go away. That will also proc your minor toughness, but only on you.
Yeah. So it's something that you need to. That's why it's usually on other people, because it's easy to heal yourself, but it's harder to heal everyone in your group to give them that buff.
Although if you do play Warden DPS, you can run bugs instead of the support, which will free up a slot for them, which is nice for them.
It is very nice for them.
Bugs being the Swarm.
Yes.
Warden DPS is the best.
Warden DPS is very, very fun. Now we have Necromancers. Necromancers are one of the best classes in the game, I would say, for buffs, just exclusively for Colossus. You can have Necromancer pretty much anything in the group. A Necromancer healer, Necro damage dealers, Necro tanks. Usually off tanks are Necro tanks. And this is because of Colossus. Colossus is a very important buff in endgame raiding, and you pretty much want to maximize the amount of major vuln that it gives, which is just flat 10% damage increase from every source all the time, while it's up, of course. So once we get to later, once I talk about gear, you'll see that there's a lot of gear sets that are based on major vuln and extending it. The reason why they make good healers, and you pretty much want at least one support to be a necromancer at all times, I would say in all content, is because of Empower and Grasp, which gives Empower, which is 40% light attack and heavy attack damage increase. Now, this might change next patch. I hope they revert the changes that they just made, because they're kind of meh, to where it only affects heavy attacks. But as of now, it increases your light attack and heavy attack damage by 40%. And you might know that in high parses, light attacks and heavy attacks are roughly 20% of your damage. So having Empower the whole time it's hard to do the math, but like 6% damage increase, something between 5 and 10, I guess, is what I would say. And on top of this, they also have Necrotic Potency, which is basically ulti gen out the wazoo. Anytime there's a corpse on the ground, you can, we call it Necro Suck, because you kind of just suck all the ult out of them. And it basically allows you in trash.
Either you are lagging or I am lagging.
Am I lagging?
Yeah, you're breaking up, and even the image is breaking up a bit, Lori.
Okay, I'll wait a second.
Yeah.
Seems maybe better.
Yeah. Yeah.
The image not, but I could hear him.
Testing.
You're there.
Okay, I'm gonna talk more. Am I still breaking up?
Doesn't seem so.
Okay.
He's better.
Okay. And you have Necrotic Potency, which basically allows you to dump an ultimate on every trash pack, which is very good when you're doing organized runs. That is Necromancers. They used to be so broken that every DPS in a raid composition was a Necromancer. Not so much anymore, but that was an interesting time during Elsewhere. Sorks. Sorks have the unique buff of Minor Prophecy, which increases your critical chance.
I thought Minor Prophecy is also on Templars.
That is Minor Sorcery. Yeah. So you'll find that there's like anti of each buff. Sorcerers and Knightblades are opposite. One provides spell critical, one provides weapon critical. And DKs and Templars are opposite. One provides weapon damage, one provides spell damage. So Minor Prophecy gives you 13, 14 spell critical. They have crystal weapons, which is really nice if you're a group that runs a lot of medium armor, because it reduces the armor of the enemies. I would say that Sorks make the best healers or damage dealers. They can make fine tanks, like very survivable as it says, but I would say that they're better suited to healing and DPSing. And healing is very fun with them, because usually you're going to run Streak for like kiting jobs, like kiting on VCR or kiting on Vet Rockgrove Oaks, and it is very fun to teleport around. Next is Plars, which have a lot of passive buffs. Not so many like buffs like you would have on a DK with, oh, they have this skill that gives this buff, give this skill that gives this buff. Most of Templars' group utility comes from their passives, which they have Minor Sorcery, which is the opposite, as I said, the opposite of Dragon Knights. And they also have Power of the Light, which gives Minor Breach, which I don't know if that's unique to them. It might be. It's been a while since I've played Templar and looked into their buffs, but it reduces their resistances, so basically increases your offensive penetration, which is very nice when you are in a group that has a lot of medium armor and stam DPS. And as it says here, they have very high heals per second. I believe they are the highest heals per second in the game, which is very nice. And they have a lot of room for non-class utility, like orbs. They can run altar. They can run bone shield a lot of the time. They're just very, very good healers and pretty solid DPS. Knightblades. Knightblades are a very fun class in the recent meta. They are very, very solid healers and pretty solid DPS. The reason why they make solid healers is because of the changes they made to Refreshing Path recently. Refreshing Path now basically gives the same buffs that a Warden's Mushrooms gives. So that allows the Warden healer, let's say you have a Warden and a Knightblade healer, that allows them to run something else, like non-class utility. They give Minor Savagery, which is the opposite of what a Sorc would give, being, this one gives 13-14 weapon critical rather than spell critical. And they have the AoE minor vulnerability that I said before, which is very nice in trash packs, because let's say you, in the same situation, you have a Warden healer and a Knightblade healer. It's hard for the Warden healer to take all the big adds and cast bugs on all of them while still healing, whereas you can just kind of teleport and strike them, and it is an AoE source of minor vul. And they have pretty high heals per second.
For stamina only? I mean, I'm missing something.
Say that again?
I just wonder if this slide is specifically stamina or some, combination of the two. I don't ever remember seeing Lotus Fan.
This is more for everything basically.
Okay.
I think Lotus Fan is more used on healer.
Yes, Lotus Fan is pretty much only used on healer, Knightblade healers.
Like, as a Knightblade DPS, you don't really do anything for the group other than kill things once it gets to 25%.
Yes. And
Okay.
you provide the Minor Savagery.
Nope, I get it. Thanks.
And I believe Minor Savagery is procced by doing critical damage while you have an assassination ability equipped.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Which pretty much all the time, right?
Yes. You can even do that on healers very, very easily. Just put down wall and you're going to be critting at least once every 10 seconds. So now that we've made it through this slide, we're going to go ahead and go back to potions and enchants. Now in this guild, it's a little different because we don't have everybody focus on weapon damage or spell damage. But in optimized groups, you're going to want to stack either into weapon damage and weapon critical and weapon critical damage, or spell. And this affects what potions and enchants you're going to use. If your group is stacking into spell damage, you're going to use spell power pots. And if stacking into weapon damage, you're going to use weapon power pots. This includes if you are going, if it's your off resource. And that could be another thing that affects how your sustain works. So let's say your main resource is magicka, but your group is stacking into weapon power. You're going to probably want to be using weapon power pots because actually I'm going to stop for a second and explain how a group stacking into weapon power and spell power would do it. So to maximize DPS, if you are stacking a group into weapon damage and weapon critical and basically weapon stats, you're going to want at least one DK because they provide a 10% increase to everybody's weapon damage, and at least one Knightblade because they provide weapon critical. If you have a group that's stacking into mag, and it's not mag, I shouldn't say, because that's not how it kind of works anymore. If you have a group stacking into spell damage, you're going to want at least one sorcerer, and one Templar. Just because their unique class buffs will help you hyper optimize your group. Does that make sense to everybody? Any questions on that?
Makes sense, and it's also a revelation.
Mm-hmm. And it's a little different for this guild because we're not that super sweaty with it, and you don't really need to be to clear most content. But
I just want to intercede just for a second and say thank God, because
yeah.
This is the
Yeah,
first time I've heard of that. I mean,
Yeah,
I knew there was
usually
one
I feel
before.
like in this skill we usually have like one of everything, so we
Yeah.
get all of the buffs.
I actually had come to think that you were supposed to balance like part weapon, part spell, but it makes sense to focus.
Yeah, you want to focus into one. And as Halfbear said, we usually have like one of everything. And if you're in a group that has one of everything, you could choose. If you want to stack into spell damage, go for it. Like, let's say you have a Sork and a Templar in the group, and you can choose to go spell, especially if that's your on resource and you want to have more sustain with your main resource. So that's basically how you decide which potions you're going to use. There's also a third type of potion that's not weapon power pots, spell power pots, that are heroism potions. And you can use those in situations where you have somebody casting igneous weapons, major sorcery and major brutality, and you have Camel Hunter or Inner Light on your front bar, which is the bar you're going to be on for the most of the time. And this is because you can use ulti pots, because the buffs that you get from front barring Inner Light and Camel Hunter and a DK casting igneous weapons is the exact same buffs that you would get from weapon and spell power pots. And because of this, it makes more sense to use ulti pots, because if you're not, you're kind of wasting some of the buffs that you could be getting.
I mean, that would play even better for characters that are tossing out ultis anyways, like a Necro or something, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yeah, using pretty much, if your job is to use your Colossus, the raid lead is almost always going to want you to use ulti pots, just so you have more Colossuses going up or going off, meaning more damage, meaning easier content. If that makes sense.
My Necro DPS is about to get a little more attention. Right, I'll mute myself now. Thanks.
All good. So, that is potions and enchants, and how choosing them works. And this is my last slide. And this is in super organized groups. Let's say you're progging hard mode content, like VSS hard mode. You're going to want most, if not all, of these sets on somebody. And we're going to start with Yolnahkrin, Claw of Yolnahkrin from Sunspire. This set is useful because it provides Minor Courage. Minor Courage is a buff that's pretty hard to come by, and it is very easy to get when somebody is running Yoln, because it procs by just them taunting something. And once they taunt it, the group gets Minor Courage for a certain amount of seconds. Minor Courage increases your weapon and spell damage, which, because weapon and spell damage have no cap, it's very good to have that buff, because there's no reason not to. Then Turning Tide. This set is solid on most content. It doesn't need to be run everywhere. It is the only other source of major vuln in the game, which is the same buff that Necromancers give with their Colossus. It's procced by taking damage on a bar that has Turning Tide and then bashing. I believe it lasts 10 seconds and then it's a 15-second cooldown. So just a tank running Turning Tide is 66% max uptime on Major Vuln, which is very, very good. And that's not including ways to extend it, which we'll talk about soon. Saxhleel. This is a set that I like to say it's I don't know what else to run. All these other sets are taken. I'm just going to put on Sax. The reason why is because Sax makes all of your ultimates basically a mini Horn. And Horn is good for the most part because of Major Force. Major Force is the major version of the buff that your Trap would give, or your Medusa, Zogvin, or Order of Wrath would give. It gives you, I guess it would be 20% of damage, or 20% increased critical damage. And it's very, very solid to have on healers or tanks, Saxhleel, because any way to increase your Major Force uptimes is increased damage. Another set, I'm going to include Tremor Scale in here as well. I like to call these the pen sets, which basically lowers the armor of your target. If your group has a lot of medium armor users and they're having trouble hitting the pen cap, you're going to want somebody in either Alkosh, in Crimson, I don't know if it's not Crimson Tide. I don't know what the actual name is. But you get the point that it lowers the armor, meaning more of your attacks are doing more damage because they have less armor and you're closer to the cap. We have Powerful Assault. I should say how Alkosh is procced. Alkosh is procced by using a synergy. Crimson Tide is procced by drinking a potion, and I believe enemies in the area get their armor lowered. And then Tremor Scale, which I believe whatever you taunt, I might be wrong on that, lowers the armor. At least one support's probably going to be in Powerful Assault. It's just a flat increase of 307 weapon and spell damage. And that is procced by using Assault abilities in your Alliance War skill tree. Usually they will use Vigor, I've seen used a lot, or sometimes you can use Charging Maneuvers or Rapids.
And Caltrops.
Caltrops as well. This is usually on a healer or a tank. I don't think I've ever seen a DPS wear Powerful Assault in anything I've been in. But that is a set that's almost always run. The Major Courage sets, which are Spell Power Cure and Olorime. I like Spell Power Cure more because it's easier to proc on the group. It's just by overhealing a person gives them Major Courage. Whereas for Olorime, you place a little circle on the ground after you place a ground ability, and the person needs to walk into that circle to get the buff. And Major Courage gives an increase in weapon and spell damage. You'll see that a lot of these just give flat increase to weapon and spell damage. This one specifically is the major version of the thing that Yoln gives you. It's usually on a healer. I would say it's almost always on a healer, unless the healer is busy running other sets. In that case, a tank can run it if needed. This is where we start getting into sets that DPS are going to be running mostly. Probably after Major Slayer. Major Slayer is the major version of the buff that you would get from Trial Gear, like from Coral Riptide, from Besides, from those sets. And it increases your damage done to PvE enemies by 10%. This is usually given to the group in two ways. You can have a healer using Roaring Opportunist and Jorvolds. Roaring Opportunist is the set that actually gives the buff. It's by doing a heavy attack on an enemy, gives 6 people in your group Major Slayer, so you end up doing 2 heavy attacks on the enemy in a row. Or you can use sets like Master Architect and War Machine, which gives Major Slayer to the group whenever you use an ultimate. And this is used in content where it's not feasible for a healer to be heavy attacking all the time. I know in Veteran Asylum Sanctorum or whatever, it's usually DPS and Master Architect because the healers have other responsibilities, so they can't be heavy attacking all the time. Now we get into Elemental Catalyst, which is my favorite support set. I do it in everything. This is used to offset downtime you might have in Major and Minor Force. It gives a 5% increase in critical damage for each of the weaknesses that you apply, which there's Frost, Flame, and Shock, which is done by doing that respective type of damage. It's usually used on a Necro. It can be on a Necro healer, tank, or DPS. It can be run on other classes, but it negatively impacts their DPS more than a Crow. Martial Knowledge, which is just a flat increase in 8% 8% increase in damage, which I believe the set has a max uptime of like 63%. So roughly, like, let's say 5% increase in damage total for the group. This can be run on DPS and healers, and it's procced by having lower than 15% stam, while also hitting a light attack on the target. And because of this, it's usually paired with Coral Riptide, because both require you to have low stam, so might as well have them both on the same person. And our final set, which is except for one trial is always run on a DPS, is Zen's, which you light attack an enemy, it gives them the debuff, and for every dot that you have ticking on them at the time, they take 1% more damage, up to 5%. Usually it's a run on a Dragon Knight because they have a bunch of dots and they pretty much can always keep it at 5. And then quickly through the monster sets, Nazare, when you ult, it extends all debuffs on the target, so it's very good for extending Major Vuln. And Kratos, I believe, increases flame damage, similar to Engulfing Flames from the D-Case. Spalder, which increases weapon and spell damage at the cost of your own sustain. And Symphony, which increases the sustain of the group. And that is my spiel. Does anybody have any questions? I know I just basically word vomited for an hour, but hopefully you got some understanding and know a little bit more of how very hyper optimized groups might build their damage and build their compositions, and also how you can improve your own damage.
Yeah, totally learned.
is it safe to assume, if you work towards some of the things that you were saying in there, that it would be, boy, what am I actually going to ask here? It would be helpful to what we do currently. I mean, it wouldn't be injurious to that experience, I assume.
No. We're not going to be doing that as a guild, if that's what you're asking. But in
Well, not really. I want to work towards being better at what we're currently doing, as well as getting ready for some stuff in the future. So, I don't want to do something stupid to my characters. That's all.
yeah. Yeah, I would say that following if you're following this advice is definitely good. Might change in the next patch, but yeah, this will help prepare you for the content that we're doing.
Yeah, next patch for sure.
Yeah. Next patch I might end up doing a whole new thing, because who knows how much is going to change. So, do you have a parse for me, Half Bear?
Yeah, I can put some up in the thing.
Yeah, go ahead and post them in the chat, and we'll go ahead and take a look at them.
My crit damage is ass.
So, we're going to look at Half Bear's Mag Crow parse here. We're going to first start by looking at this wonderful window right here. This little, where it says stats, effective, and max. I don't know if you can see my cursor on the Discord stream.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, cool. So, looking at max magicka or max stamina, depending on which one you're looking at, that's not usually super needed. So is spell damage. What you really want to be focusing on is spell penetration and critical damage. You want in a parse to be hitting around 125% for critical damage. So my first thing that I would suggest is to...
How do you get critical damage if you're doing light armor?
Kilt is...
I don't have that.
Okay. Then I would say...
You can't run on everything, too.
I would say probably run Fighting Finesse as well, instead of one of these other ones. That will get you to 118? No. 116. And if you were to get killed...
if I wasn't using a heavy ice hard head.
Oh yeah, that would also help.
That's old meta right there.
Yeah. Double medium on the monster helms would help a lot. Assuming it doesn't negatively impact your sustain too bad. Your penetration is fine, so you could stand to lose a couple of light pieces. You could do that by like dropping okay, let's assume that you start using Kinras instead of advancing Yakita. You can put a Sororia ring on and put a Kinras medium piece here in order to maximize your critical damage whilst making sure you still remain at the pen cap. Let's see. That's pretty much always the first thing I look at when I'm looking at a parse, is this wonderful window here. After that, I go to gear. Your gear is fine. It's using a Slayer set. It's using Advancing Yakita. It's using a monster set. As I said, we probably want this to be a medium, because this is old meta. I remember when we used to have to run 3 of everything, or 1 of each. But yeah, other than that, gear looks fine. Enchants are good. Daggers, you want Nern and Charged right now. I think that might change next patch. I don't know. You have spell damage. That's good. Max mag. Good. Now we're going to look at weaving. How I like to look at weaving first is to just look at this weaving average. this is the amount of time between casts of something. And you want this to be as low as possible. 0.1 right here is very good. It's very, very solid. And you can see that in this total parse that lasted 4 minutes and 6 seconds, Half Bear only lost 22 seconds to missed or to time in between casts. Next thing I like to look at is the weapon attacks and skills. When you're light attack weaving, assuming your light attack skill, light attack skill, light attack skill, you want these to be even. Half Bear's pretty much even. That's pretty close. I know sometimes I go too fast and my weapon attacks are way lower than my skill cast, meaning I'm missing light attacks in between casts of my abilities. Next thing I look at is individual weaves for each of your abilities. You can see that through this little weave section right here. And I like to compare that to this weaving average right here. So 0.1, that's pretty much your normal weave. Your blast bones are fine. You miss 2 light attacks in between your blast bones, 2 light attacks in between ricocheting skulls. Mixed Siphon is a little slower than average. Barb Trap is a little faster. Flawless Dawnbreaker, this is pretty high compared to your average. So work on, I know Flawless Dawnbreaker, you have to wait less than half a second because the light attack with it is a little strange. Boneyard is the same. Boneyard can be really tricky to light attack into because heck, sometimes the skill doesn't even want to go off. Necro things. Rune, good. Wall, could be better. That's something you can work on. And same thing with Skeletal Arcanist.
Yeah, I'm not as good weaving with staffs as I am with daggers to the build.
Yeah, I have the same thing with bows. I am
horrible at bows are bad.
I am horrible at weaving with bows. But you can kind of get the picture. And I would look at CP after that. Also, yeah, just look at CP based on this. So knowing what we know, we want to keep penetration at 1820, which it is, but we want to increase critical damage. Critical damage comes before any other CP, I would say. So I would take off Deadly Aim, Thaumaturge, or Master at Arms. Probably Thaumaturge. Thinking about it.
Necros get the dot buff, right? So I don't know about taking off Thaumaturge.
I would say Deadly Aim then. Taking off Deadly Aim and putting Fighting Finesse to get you higher up to that crit cap. Your Boundless Vitality, Fortified, Rejuvenation, Siphoning Spells, that's fine. Green doesn't matter.
But I get more gold.
True. And you're faster on a horse. So that's how I would analyze this parse initially, and the tips that I would give. I would also say you can probably instead of Inner Light use Camo Hunter, because most of the time in content you're going to be flanking anyway, except in Sunspire. So it technically in Camo Hunter does do a little bit more damage, I think, because it gives the same buffs, but you also get the flank thing.
And spell damage too from the Slayer passive.
Yeah. So that's what I would say. You could also... How was your sustain during this parse?
It was fine.
Okay. You were using spell power?
Yeah.
Okay. And Ghastly Eyeball?
Yep, Ghastly.
Okay. Yeah. So that's what I would say. You could probably change Siphon as well. You could do Detonating Siphon on Mag.
Well, I'm gonna be doing this. That's for the EC, right?
Oh, okay, yeah. I see what you're doing now. So yeah. Other than that, this is how I would analyze it. And now let's look at the one you have labeled good.
Yeah, it's a lot better.
Yes, I would say 112k is better than 85. So even at 112k, there is still things that we can improve. Let's see. To get like super max hyper damage. First thing I look at is this box. Max, don't care. Weapon spell damage or weapon damage doesn't really matter. Weapon critical, as long as it's high. You want it at least higher than 60% most of the time. I see here that your critical damage, its max is pretty high. You might be able to lower that. Let's see what.
I would probably drop the kilt, honestly.
Or you could run a light slime craw. There's another way that you could do it. Yeah, I would say because kilt is very good because of the increase in critical chance. I would just probably run a light slime craw, or maybe even no. You're fine on penetration. That's good. That's good. Now let's look at weaving. A little slower than your last one. A lot of that probably comes from carve.
I cannot weave that to save my life.
Yeah, it's real tough. I would for the people that are watching, how I taught myself to weave how I teach myself to weave certain abilities. I just go to a 6 mil and just light attack carve, light attack carve, light attack carve until my fingers and brain get a feel for it, and usually that's enough to help lower it at least a decent amount. Cutting dive fine is good. It's pretty much the only light attack that you missed. Sub assault really solid. Sub assault can be hard to weave sometimes. Yeah, this looks solid. When you're parsing, I know you like to do the like have a heal. When you're parsing, you could cheat. You could put on another dot there.
I don't like cheating though.
Fair enough. If you cheated, you could probably get like, I don't know, 115k, something like that. But you don't need to. And honestly, it's a good idea to not cheat sometimes.
I only have a 97% minor force. It's not 100.
Shaking my head.
Figured out with the well ones that I could get 2 storm macros down at the beginning of my fight.
Oh.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For the Reli's daggers, one Nirnhund, one charged. Is charged the offhand thing to do now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Because when you're dual wielding, the offhand has lower damage. So having Nirnhund front bar means that percentage buff that Nirnhund gives is bigger than if you had Nirnhund on back bar.
I think they're nerfing charge next patch too.
Yes, they are nerfing charge next patch.
So
it might be precise, I think, is what we're thinking.
I can go back to my old ones.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's pretty much what I would say. Bloodthirsty. You want divines on all your body pieces. You want bloodthirsty on all your jewelry. Infused on your back bar with a weapon damage enchant. And that's pretty much it. You'll see here that this is one of the examples of a build that does better without a Minor Slayer set. Drozakar is a set that increases your weapon and spell damage based on how many bleeds you have. And looking here,
how many do I have? One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah.
6.
And if you do cutting dive and time it with your off balances of the dummy, which there's like an off balance tracker, you can have like 14 bleeds on the target, which is like, I don't know, can get you up to like 9k weapon damage.
The death of 1,000 cuts.
Yes, exactly. Another thing that I want to point out that it took me until like 800 CP to learn this. There is passives in the blue tree that you are going to want to get. Things like War Mage and Mighty and Elemental Aegis and Flawless Ritual. There's another one. I think that's it. But those give just passive damage buffs to all of your abilities, both mag and stan costing. And specifically it's based on physical debuffs, which is disease, bleeds, poison, whereas magical ones are chill, burning, and concussed, I believe. Something like that. So not having and having these is probably a difference in your DPS of about like 20%. So you want to make sure you have all of your passives as well as your slottables. And
so depending on like if you're stammer mag, you want to go into the ones that are your class trait first, but you don't want to skip the ones that are for mag, like if you're stam,
yes,
because you'll still get use out of it.
exactly. And the other passive in the game that I didn't know that I needed that increased my damage is medicinal use in your alchemy tree, which extends the duration of your potions by a certain percent. So when you're parsing and you have weapon power potions that are giving you savagery and brutality, you're going to want to have those at a max uptime, which is 100% when you have max medicinal use. Where if you don't have medicinal use, it's like 65%, which is a big decrease in your damage.
Yeah, so I'm using spell power pots on my necro. So with medicinal use, it's gives me all of the buffs for 47.6 seconds, and it has a 45-second cooldown. So you can not have like you can forget about your potion for a couple seconds longer after it's like recharged, and you'll still have it. But if you don't have medicinal use, it's like it's not going to be up all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see if I can open one of my parses. 1 second. We don't need to look at one of my parses. I don't want to open it up. But that is pretty much all I have planned. Hope you all learned something going over the slides and these parses and how I would look at a parse to help improve damage. Yeah. Any last questions before I end this recording? Okay. Bye, people that are watching after the fact.